Lost and found. Lost Indian boy finds his mother. Saru Brearley was only 5 years old when he got lost. He was working with his older brother as a sweeper on India's trains. Together, they traveled hundreds of miles up and down the vast network. It was late at night. We got off the train, and I was so tired that I just sat down at the train station, and I ended up falling asleep. That fateful nap would determine the rest of his life. He thought his brother would come back for him, but when he woke up the brother was nowhere to be seen. There was a train in front of him. Perhaps his brother was on board. He got on it to look for him. However, Saru did not meet his brother on the train. Instead, he fell asleep again, and when he woke up 14 hours later, he had a terrible shock. There were hordes of people, pushing, rushing, speaking in an unfamiliar tongue. He had arrived in Calcutta, India's third biggest city and notorious for its slums. He was nearly 1,500 kilometers, 930 miles, from his home. Soon, he was sleeping rough. It was a very scary place to be. I do not think any mother or father would like to have their 5-year-old wandering alone in the slums and train stations of Calcutta. I was scared. I didn't know where I was. The little boy learned to fend for himself. He became a beggar, one of the many children begging on the streets of the city. Once he was approached by a man who promised him food and shelter. But Saru was suspicious and ran away. In the end, Saru was taken in by an orphanage and put up for adoption. He was adopted by the Brearleys, a couple from Tasmania. I accepted that I was lost and that I could not find my way back home, so I thought it was great that I was going to Australia. After 25 years, using Google Earth, Saru settled down well in his new home. But, as he got older, the desire to find his birth family became increasingly strong. The problem was that as an illiterate 5-year-old he had not known the name of his hometown. All he had to go on were his vivid memories. So, he began using Google Earth to search for where he might have been born. It was difficult, but eventually Saru hit on an effective strategy. I multiplied the time I was on the train, about 14 hours, with the speed of Indian trains, and I came up with a rough distance, about 1,200 kilometers. He drew a circle on a map with its center in Calcutta, with its radius about the distance he thought he had traveled. Incredibly, he soon discovered what he was looking for, the town of Kundava. When I found it, I zoomed down and bang, the waterfall where I used to play. He journeyed to Kundava. He found his way around the town with his childhood memories. Eventually, he found his home. But it was not what he had hoped for. It looked old and shabby, as if nobody had lived there for a long time. A neighbor said that his family had moved. Then he struck gold. Another neighbor said he knew where his mother lived now. The man guided Saru to where 3 women stood waiting. He stared at them blankly. Only the woman in the middle seemed remotely familiar. The man gestured towards her. "This is your mother," he said. She had been young, in her 30s, the last time he saw her. She looked so much older now. But behind the weathered face, there was something unmistakable, unforgettable, his mother, Fatima. The last time I saw her she was 34 years old and a pretty lady. I had forgotten that age would get the better of her. But then I recognized her and I said, "Yes, you are my mother." She grabbed my hand and took me into her house. She could not say anything to me. She had a bit of trouble grasping that her son, after 25 years, had returned. She had long feared I was dead. Fatima had searched the train stations for her missing son, but she had never ventured as far as Calcutta. She couldn't imagine he had gone so far. However, she had never lost hope. A fortune teller had told her that one day she would see her son again. And what of the brother with whom Saru had originally gone traveling? Unfortunately, the news was not good. A month after I had disappeared, my brother was found in 2 pieces on a railway track. We were extremely close. When I left my mother to return to Tasmania, I was heartbroken knowing that my older brother had passed away. His mother had never known whether foul play was involved or whether the boy had simply slipped and fallen under a train. Saru Brearley's lifelong wish had been to see his birth mother again. He feels incredibly grateful that this wish was granted. He has kept in touch with his newly found family, and now Hollywood studios have made a star-studded, award-winning film about his amazing story.
A planet poisoned by plastic. From Hawaiian beaches to the coast of Britain, we're paying a lethal price for our throwaway society, says TV adventurer, Simon Reeve. Hawaii is generally considered to be one place in the world where you should be able to guarantee finding paradise. The beautiful tropical islands have been used as the setting for countless TV series and films, ranging from Lost to Jurassic Park. Isolated in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, distance alone should protect Hawaii's spectacular landscapes and turquoise sea from the environmental problems facing the rest of the planet. So when I arrived in Hawaii, I was staggered to discover beaches covered in plastic rubbish washed up from around the world. Pristine sand was covered by old plastic toothbrushes, combs, shoes, belts and moldings. Sam Gon, a Hawaiian conservationist, took me to one beach where 70 local volunteers were doing their best to remove tons of garbage. But as soon as it was cleaned, the waves dumped another mountain of rubbish. The larger pieces of waste can be collected by hand. But when Sam and I dropped to our knees, I could see the surface of the beach was covered with millions of small plastic pellets, known as nurdles. These are the raw material that factories use to form the infinite number of plastic products that fill our lives. These are dumped out of factories into our seas in their trillions. Yet the big shock came when Sam told me to dig in the sand. Plastic doesn't biodegrade. Instead it breaks down into even smaller pieces. Among the grains of sand were billions of tiny plastic flecks, which the pounding of the sea was reducing in size. As I dug through the plastic, I realized the sandy beach was being transformed into a plastic beach. A chill went down my spine. From the beaches of Hawaii to the seas around Britain, we are soiling our own nest. It was a shock to realize how much British beaches have changed since I was a child playing on beautiful coastlines in Dorset and South Wales. Just like those in Hawaii, they are now covered in more litter than ever before. Since 1994, plastic litter has increased by an extraordinary 140%. The plastic we see on our beaches is just a fraction of the plastic waste that is clogging our oceans. Incredibly, all the plastic ever created, totaling hundreds of millions of tons, is still out there in the environment in some form. There are an estimated 600,000 plastic containers dumped overboard by ships every single day. 9 million tons of plastic enter our seas every year, which means that by 2025, there will be around 150 million tons of it sloshing around. And even more unbelievably, by 2050 the oceans will contain more plastic by weight than fish. The scale of the problem is extraordinary. The beaches in Hawaii are being swamped by rubbish from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, a vast accumulation of the world's plastic debris floating in the Pacific Ocean. Twice the size of France, the garbage patch is like a plastic soup in the sea and is doubling in size each decade. And this is not the only such patch. Scientists believe that sea currents have created 5 vast swirling garbage patches in our oceans, including a huge one in the North Atlantic with up to 520,000 bits of rubbish per square mile. This is an international scandal and a global problem, for which we are all responsible. Factories produced more plastic in the first decade of this 21st century than in the entire 20th century. From bicycle helmets to food packaging, from water bottles to toothbrushes, plastic makes our lives easier. But its production and use are completely out of control. Factories produced more plastic in the first decade of this 21st century than in the entire 20th century. Because tiny fragments of plastic in our oceans are so small and look like food, they are being gobbled up by small fish, which in turn are eaten by larger fish, which in turn are eaten by us. Plastic is ruining our beaches, choking the oceans, and poisoning our food chain. The consequences are still not fully understood, but they are likely to be devastating. We need to spurn and reject the main culprits: plastic bags, packaging and single-use water bottles, a wasteful obscenity. These make up the bulk of plastic garbage. In Bangladesh and Kenya, they have done away with plastic bags completely, and replaced them with natural jute bags. The UK has joined the growing number of countries which impose a tax on plastic bags, and the small town of Modbury has banned them completely. Supermarkets around the world are beginning to introduce plastic-free aisles, where none of the goods on sale are packaged in plastic. At stake is the future of beaches, our seas, and the food chain. It is nothing short of an environmental emergency.
The Clinging Woman. Part 1. The girl was hanging by her hands from the railings of a balcony. The balcony was on the 12th floor of the high-rise block next to his. His flat was on the 6th floor and he had to look up to see her. It was 6:30 in the morning. He had been awakened by the sound of an aircraft flying dangerously low overhead, and he had got out of bed to look. His sleepy gaze, descending from the blue sky which was empty of clouds, empty of anything but the bright vanishing arrow of the aircraft, alighted, at first with disbelief, on the hanging figure. Part 2. He really thought he must be dreaming, for this sunrise time was the hour for dreams. Then, when he knew he wasn't, he decided it must be a stunt. This was to be a scene in a film. There were cameramen down there, a whole film unit, and all the correct safety precautions had been taken. Probably the girl wasn't even a real girl, but a dummy. He opened the window and looked down. The car park, paved courts, grass spaces between the blocks, all were deserted. On the balcony rail one of the dummy's hands moved, clutching its anchorage more tightly, more desperately. He had to believe then what was obviously happening, unbelievable only because melodrama, though a frequent constituent of real life, always is. The girl was trying to kill herself, she had lost her nerve and now was trying to stay alive. All these thoughts and conclusions of his occupied about 30 seconds. Then he acted. He picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number for the police. The arrival of the police cars and the rescue of the girl became the focus of gossip and speculation for the tenants of the 2 blocks. Someone found out that it was he who had alerted the police and he became an unwilling hero. He was a modest, quiet young man, and, disliking this limelight, was relieved when the talk began to die away, when the novelty of it wore off, and he was able to enter and leave his flat without being pointed at as a kind of St. George and sometimes even congratulated. About a fortnight after that morning of melodrama, he was getting ready to go to the theater, just putting on his overcoat, when the doorbell rang. He didn't recognize the girl who stood outside. He had never seen her face. She said, "I'm Lydia Simpson. You saved my life. I've come to thank you."
Fake news. In 2017, fake news was Collins Dictionary's word of the year. The previous year Oxford Dictionaries chose a post-truth as theirs. Jeff Broadbent gives us the facts on the increasing unreliability of our news media, or at least we think he does. As an investigative journalist, I spend my days checking facts and making sure I have evidence for the stories I'm writing. So it's not surprising that the idea of being in a post-truth age keeps me awake at night. It's a terrifying thought that many people no longer care whether a news story is actually true, and are simply content to read something that feels true. The good old days? Now, I'm not pretending that everything in the media was 100% reliable in the past. We sometimes got things very wrong, and separating fact from fiction became more challenging as soon as the internet provided every amateur journalist with an audience. So what's different now? Well, in the past, we usually knew which articles had left reality behind, conspiracy theories telling us that men didn't really land on the moon, or that the British royal family ordered the murder of Princess Diana. This stuff was on fringe websites that looked like they were written by fantasists, and was read by a small minority. Most of us went to mainstream news outlets to find out what was really happening in the world, and although we know that newspapers and news stations have their own political bias, we felt safe in assuming that the basic facts were accurate. Spreading lies. The big difference nowadays is that most people don't go to news outlets for their news stories. The stories come to them via social media sites such as Facebook. Articles appear in people's newsfeed or are shared and forwarded by friends. And this is why millions now read stories that may appear to be from credible news sources, but are in fact not merely biased, but total fabrication. And it matters. One of the first instances where fake news may have influenced an election was in the US in 2016. There have always been exaggerations and untruths during election campaigns, but in this one there was an organized strategy of targeting key voters with fake news stories via social media. An analysis of how millions of Facebook users engaged with these fake stories showed that in the last 3 months of the campaign, they got more shares, likes, and comments than all the real stories from traditional news outlets. And is it just coincidence that most of the fake stories were in favor of the eventual winner, Donald Trump? Choosing what to believe. President Trump was also one of the first politicians to take advantage of the fake news phenomenon. When reporters confronted him with negative news stories, his answer was simple: fake news. Next question. Other world leaders have done the same, and their supporters are quick to believe them. Many people are happy to view all facts as doubtful. It makes it easy for them to choose what to believe and stick to their prejudices. Bogus is business. Now there are whole fake news sites out there, producing bogus stories that people share unthinkingly. It's big business, because the most sensational stories get thousands of clicks, and advertisers will pay huge sums to make use of this traffic. And so we end up with a very worrying question in a democracy: how do we know who or what to vote for if we can't be sure what's true? But then I'll leave you with an even bigger question: how many of us really want to know the truth, if it challenges our deeply held beliefs and lifestyles?
The story of Lego. Success in stats. There are more Lego figures on Earth than people, and 86 Lego bricks for every person alive. Lego is actually the world's biggest tire manufacturer. They make 400 million a year. In 1932, in Billund, Denmark, Ole Kurt Christensen had an idea. He'd had a woodworking workshop since 1916, but the Great Depression had come, and the locals couldn't afford to buy much. Ole saw that people often spent what little money they had on toys for their children, and decided to make some, using spare bits of wood. He was helped by his grandson, Gottfred, who joined the business aged 12. An early story demonstrates how seriously Ole took his motto: only the best is good enough. Gottfred came home looking pleased one evening, and told Ole he'd saved the business money by putting only 2 layers of varnish on a toy duck, instead of 3. Ole gave him a good telling off, and made him go back to the workshop immediately to add a 3rd layer, in order to achieve the quality required. Success, brick by brick. The Lego Toy Company was established in 1934. The name comes from the Swedish "legot," meaning to play well. Only much later, after the company began making its connecting bricks, was it discovered that Lego in Latin means "I put together." The idea for plastic self-locking building bricks actually came from a British company, Kiddicraft. Lego started making them in 1949, but it wasn't until 1958, when the locking design was much improved, that sales took off. That was also the year Ole died, and Gottfred took over the company. Lego's enormous success is due to its quality, and the endless creativity it allows children. A mathematician recently calculated that 6 Lego bricks could be combined in 915,103,765 ways. And it's not just children who love it. AFAL's adult fans of Lego include David Beckham and Ed Sheeran, and are a valuable market. Less enthusiastic adults are those who spend hours on Christmas morning assembling complicated Lego sets for their children, and also discover that standing on a Lego brick in bare feet can be very painful. Surviving difficult times. In the new millennium, children began to spend a lot more time playing digital games. By 2003, Lego sales were down by 30%, and the company was $800 million in debt. Business consultants said the brick was dead, and told Lego to diversify into clothes and jewelry, video games, and Legoland parks. All of these lost money, and Lego nearly went bust. In 2015, however, it became the world's most powerful brand, having quadrupled its profits since 2008. This was done by selling off its Legoland and video games arms, and focusing again on its key product, the bricks and sets. The internet was used to build a strong community of Lego fans, and the huge amount of love they have for the physical bricks and figures is shown by the thousands of YouTube videos they share of their collections. The story of IKEA. Success in stats. IKEA has over 300 stores in 41 countries. On some Sundays in Britain, almost twice as many people visit an IKEA branch as attend church. All children ask their grandparents for things, but 5-year-old Ingvar Kamprad's request to his grandmother was unusual. He asked her to buy boxes of matches for him in bulk, which he then sold to people for a profit. At the age of 10, he was cycling around Småland, Sweden selling seeds, fish and pencils. In 1943, when he was 17, Ingvar's father gave him some money for doing well at school despite his dyslexia. Ingvar used it to start a mail order company selling household goods, and called it IKEA. It stands for Ingvar Kamprad from Elmtrud, a Gunyard, his boyhood address. An early story shows how driven he was. When his father said he slept too late, Ingvar set his alarm clock for 6 o'clock a.m. and removed the off button. Fast furniture. Ingvar's main competitor sold furniture, and it gave him an idea. At the time, stylish furniture was a luxury few could afford, and only after saving up for years. What if he could make it affordable for all sooner? He did it by buying and selling in bulk as cheaply as possible. His motto was, "It's better to sell 600 chairs at a lower price than sell 60 chairs at a high price." He bought an old factory and manufactured even cheaper furniture himself, keeping quality high. Other furniture manufacturers were horrified at IKEA's low prices, and persuaded all the wood suppliers in Sweden to boycott the company. Ingvar's entire business was threatened, and he was forced to find suppliers from abroad. In fact, the Polish wood he bought made his products even cheaper. He opened his first big showroom in 1958, with the familiar IKEA sign, but in red and white. The yellow and blue of the Swedish flag came later. As more Swedes bought cars, Kamprad cut rental costs by opening stores out of town. The real lightbulb moment came when a colleague couldn't get an IKEA table into his car, and unscrewed the legs and taped them underneath the table to make it go in. Introducing flat-pack furniture, which customers took home and assembled themselves, brought huge savings in storage and delivery costs. Flat-pack fans? Not everyone was a fan of self-assembly furniture. Many people got frustrated with the text-free diagrams, and with each other, when putting the furniture together. One of the biggest self-assembly items became known as the divorce maker. IKEA also hit cultural problems when expanding abroad. In America, customers thought the glass vases were expensive drinking glasses. The actual drinking glasses were way too small for them. IKEA's global success has continued, however, and Ingvar played a major role in it right up until his death. In 2014, he said, "I have so much work to do and no time to die," but in 2018, aged 91, he finally found enough time and left his 3 sons in charge of the company.
I cycled from India to Europe for love. It was December 1975, and in New Delhi, India, a street artist, known as PK, met a Swedish tourist. They fell in love. It was love at first sight. But she had to return home. He refused to give up. Months later, he set off on a 7,000 kilometers bike trip to join her. Short-lived married bliss. Pradyumna Kumar Mahanandia, PK, was a street artist from what was known as the untouchable castle. He was drawing portraits of tourists when he met a young Swedish student, Charlotte von Schedven, Lotta. She was traveling round India in a VW camper van with friends, and she had asked him to draw her. Now, after more than 40 years of marriage and 2 children, they can still remember every detail of their meeting. PK holds up a palm leaf inscribed by an astrologer and given to his parents on the day he was born. It says that I would marry a foreign lady with white skin who was musical, he tells me. I knew it was Lotta as soon as I saw her. In January 1976, just a few days after they met, the couple made the journey to PK's home village in Orissa, in the east of India, to meet his family and get married. PK's father gave them his blessing, but their married bliss was short-lived. Lotta had to get back to Sweden to continue her studies, but she made PK promise that he would follow her. So, with her companions in the camper van, she began the long trek back, overland through Asia and Europe. An impossible journey made possible. For some young lovers, this might have marked the end. Not so for PK and Lotta. Letters flew between the two. Still sketching tourists, PK started planning the seemingly impossible, an overland journey of 7,000 kilometers to rejoin Lotta in Sweden. Flying was out of the question, he says. Eventually, he realized a pushbike might offer him salvation and bought a ladies' Raleigh. It was half the price of the men's model. He set off with his passport, a spare pair of trousers, a sleeping bag, and $80 sewn into his clothes. The route was tough, through Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, but PK recalls it fondly. He says he became part of a family on the hippie trail. We helped each other. We looked after each other, he says. He talks of how he helped a German girl, after a car accident in Afghanistan left her badly injured,
and of how a Belgian traveler pointed out to him that Sweden was, in fact, a different country from Switzerland. His talent as an artist attracted attention along the way. He managed to get past the border guards into Pakistan by drawing their portraits. He earned enough money to eat and travel. Lotta says being an artist was a kind of currency for him. He could get very close to people quickly. When you draw them, they trust you. PK ditched the old bike and bought a slightly less shaky one. He was getting there, slowly but surely. Were there any doubts at all? On the journey, I had doubts that I would die and wouldn't be able to fulfill my meeting with Lotta, he says. But I knew in the next life I would find her, he says. Lotta adds that she had no doubts. It was just a matter of time that you would turn up, she says. His journey was a test for us being separated. PK's journey was accelerated when Linnea, the German girl he had helped, sent him a train ticket to Vienna, and again when a gallery owner in the city, impressed with both his story and talent as an artist, handed over the means to the final leg of his journey, tickets to Copenhagen and Gothenburg. Together again. About 16 months after their parting as newlyweds, PK and Lotta got together again. It was a moment of intense emotion. PK, overcome with excitement and tiredness, started to cry. Lotta took him for a walk in the local park, where they sat among the flowers, drinking coffee. It was a great step for my parents to embrace our lives together, says Lotta. My mother had been initially cautious, but I had my willpower and strong belief that this would work. They never seriously considered returning to India to live. But they set up a scholarship for children in PK's village. Their children, Emily and Carl Siddhartha, known as Kid Sid, are now 31 and 29. I love that they know that as soon as we met, we wanted to be with each other, says Lotta. We will never be separated. PK says, bumping along on my bike, my goal was just to get to Lotta.
Tarzan of Central Park. Anyone visiting New York for the first time should try to get a room high up in one of the hotels at the southern end of Central Park. The view is extraordinary. The park extends northwards until it is lost from sight in a sea of treetops, with enormous cliffs of stone and cement on each side. Life among the treetops. For many years, legends grew among people who lived near the park, legends of life among the treetops. One story was of a young handsome man who had been spotted from time to time among the branches. In this case, the rumor turned out to be true. There was a young, handsome man who had been living in the treetops for 8 years, until discovered by the city authorities. I like the solitude. It's a touching tale. Bob Redman, brought up by his mother in a tiny Manhattan apartment, had always been addicted to trees. When he was 14, he went into the park and built himself a tree house. It was the first of 13 houses, each one more elaborate than the last. I like to be in trees, Redman explained to a reporter from the New York Times. I like to be up, away from everything. I like the solitude. I love most of all to look at the stars. The view at night of the city lights and stars is beyond description. A 5-room split-level home. His final house was the grandest of them all. Constructed at the top of a huge beech tree, it was what an estate agent would describe as a 5-room, split-level home, commanding spectacular views of the city skyline and Central Park. It included ladders and rope bridges leading to an adjacent tree, as well as wooden benches and tables. Who can imagine what the rent might be for such a house? Friends come to visit. Redman went to great pains to hide his tree houses, building them in neglected corners of the park and camouflaging them with branches and green paint. Friends used to come to visit him, sometimes as many as 12 people at a time, bringing sandwiches and radios and books and torches. Certain rules had to be obeyed: no breaking branches, no litter, no fires, and no loud music, except his brother Bill, who sometimes brought a set of conga drums and played them very late at night, giving rise to the rumors of a tree-dwelling tribe. The party's over. Although the park authorities quickly became aware of his activities, the houses would often go undetected for long periods of time. Some lasted as long as a whole year before they were found and destroyed by officials, with a mournful Bob Redman watching from a distance. His magnificent final house went unnoticed for 4 months before Bob was awoken one morning with the word, "Come down. The party's over." He climbed down and was met by Frank Serp, park director, and 10 officers of the park's enforcement patrol. Mr. Serp had been hunting Redman for years, but he was generous in his praise for the houses. "We marveled at the spectacular workmanship," he said. "The floors were strong enough to hold a truck, and not one nail was driven into the tree." And when Bob offered to help dismantle the treehouse, Well, he walked up the tree, an officer said. It was amazing. The perfect job. Mr. Serp concluded that rather than lock him up, they should offer Redman a job. He is now a professional pruner and tree climber for the Central Park Conservancy. However, he has had to promise not to build any more tree houses. He says he cannot believe that a job so perfect for him could possibly exist. This story just goes to prove that America is still a land of opportunity, where dreams can become reality. And, in the hectic, competitive world of New York, it is comforting to know that a man like Bob Redman exists. Postscript. When a New York writer called Shira Boss needed her tiny Japanese maple tree pruning, someone suggested a man called Bob Redman. They are now married, with 2 sons, and Shira has written a children's book telling Bob's story, Up in the Leaves, which was published in 2018.
One of the greatest mysteries of English history. In August 2012, the skeleton of a 500-year-old man was discovered beneath a council car park in Leicester, England. This find caused great excitement among archaeologists and historians. Richard III. The Princes in the Tower. Richard III was born in 1452. He became king in 1483 after the death of his elder brother, Edward IV, having seized the throne from Edward's 2 young sons. He imprisoned the boys in the Tower of London, where he allegedly had them murdered. The scandal of the Princes in the Tower caused Henry Tudor to challenge him for the throne. Richard amassed an army of 12,000 men near the town of Leicester. Henry marched towards him with his army of 5,000. They met and fought in the Battle of Bosworth Field. The year was 1485, the last time any English king actually fought in battle with his men. Richard, aged just 32, was killed, and Henry Tudor took the throne as Henry VII. He was the father of Henry VIII and grandfather of Elizabeth I. Richard's first burial. According to historical records, Richard's body was taken to Leicester and buried without a coffin in a friary graveyard. This was subsequently destroyed in the 16th century. It wasn't until 500 years after his death that a team from Leicester University set out to find the site of Richard's burial. In August 2012, they began excavating in a car park in the city centre and soon discovered a skeleton, which was found in good condition but with its feet missing. It also had a badly curved spine and 10 battle-related injuries. It was subjected to months of DNA tests which linked it not only to the English actor, Benedict Cumberbatch, but also to descendants in Canada, who are genealogically linked to Richard's sister, Anne of York. This was final confirmation that the body was Richard III. A facial reconstruction of the skull was made, which looks remarkably like portraits of the king. Shakespeare's Richard. Richard III was portrayed by Shakespeare as a hunchback tyrant with a withered arm who murdered 2 innocent princes. However, modern historians argue that Richard was the victim of Henry VII propaganda because archaeologists found no evidence of a withered arm. His second burial. In 2014, the king was finally given a royal burial and his remains were laid to rest in Leicester Cathedral.
The Vikings, raiders, traders and intrepid explorers. From the fury of the Northmen, O Lord, deliver us. The year is 793 AD, and this was the petrified cry of the ancient Anglo-Saxons, pleading with God to save them from the Vikings, or Norsemen. For nearly 300 years, from the 8th to the 11th century AD, this warrior race set out from Scandinavia on raids and voyages of discovery and colonization across the northern world. They struck fear in the hearts of the peoples of Europe, but the archaeology of their settlements and the literature of their sagas reveal a complex and fascinating culture. They were not only violent raiders and pillagers, they were a lot else besides. 1. This striking-looking race, with their blonde hair and blue eyes, were descended from Germanic tribes that settled in what is now Scandinavia. Most Vikings were at heart farmers and fishermen, not warriors. They grew vegetables and cereal crops, and tended their livestock. Skilled Viking craftsmen included blacksmiths, leather workers and jewelers. 2. They worshipped a variety of gods. Chief among them were Odin, Thor, and Frey. Today we recall them as Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. It is said that Odin created the runes, the 24 letters of the Old Norse alphabet. These were carved on stone tablets, with scenes of Norse myths. 3. Above all, the Vikings were skillful shipbuilders and navigators. With their magnificent longships they embarked on voyages of exploration far and wide, from Britain to Baghdad, trading their iron, furs and grindstones for goods which they could not get at home, such as silk, glass and silver. 4. However, in the late 8th century, trading was replaced by raiding. Having the fastest ships of the day, they sprang surprise attacks on European monasteries, thereafter extorting protection money as a price of peace. This was known as Danegeld. This reign of terror began in 793, with a ferocious attack on England's Lindisfarne monastery. 5. By the mid-9th century, the Vikings were seeking to increase their wealth and power even further. They struck out across the unwelcoming Atlantic, and in 870, reached Iceland. As many as 12,000 Viking immigrants ultimately settled there, setting up the Althing, the oldest parliament in the world. 6. In 982, one of these immigrants, the hot-tempered Eric the Red, banished from his homeland for killing 2 men in a violent feud, sailed westward again, finally settling down in a grey, desolate land of fjords and glacier. Cunningly, he named it Greenland so as to attract more settlers to join him and his family. 7. Eric's eldest son, Leif Erikson, became intrigued by tales of yet more lands, and in 1003, he mounted an expedition further west. He finally landed in a place which he named Vinland, today known as Newfoundland, thereby discovering North America nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus.
Have you ever wondered? 1. Why is it so difficult to swat a fly? That buzzing fly is really getting on your nerves. So, you get your fly swatter and watch silently until the fly is resting. You get as close as you can, tense your muscles, and then, thwack. But the fly is happily buzzing around on the other side of the room. And yet you moved so fast, how could it have got away? The fly's ability to escape has nothing to do with its sensitivity to wind or noise, it's all to do with its eyesight and the speed of its brain signals. Flies have around 6,000 tiny lenses in each eye, and their brains and nervous systems can receive and process information 7 times faster than humans. As a result, they see things in slow motion compared to us. High-speed digital cameras show that from the fly's viewpoint, your hand is moving towards it very slowly. Within 30 thousandths of a second of seeing the swatter, the fly has worked out where it's coming from and how to jump away from it. Your hand takes about 2/100ths of a second to reach it, 150 times longer, so unless the fly is feeling very groggy, you stand no chance. If you still want to try, the best strategy is to aim your swatter towards where you think the fly is going to jump, rather than where it is now. 2. Why are buttons on different sides on men's and women's clothing? Have you ever borrowed a boyfriend's or girlfriend's coat and found that doing up the buttons feels weird? They're on the wrong side. The reasons for this strange inconsistency lie in the distant past. When men carried swords, they were worn on the left, so they could draw them using the usually dominant right hand. If their jackets had had buttons on the left, the handle of the sword would have easily got caught in their clothing as they pulled it across their body. It was also easier to slip the hand inside to pull out a hidden weapon if clothing was buttoned this way. So how come women's buttons are different? Well, in the 17th and 18th centuries all buttons were made by hand, and because they were expensive, they were only used on the clothes of wealthy women. It wasn't considered proper for wealthy women to dress themselves, and the servants found it easier to do up the buttons on someone facing them if they were on the left. In the late 19th century, when buttons became cheaper with mass production, all women wanted to copy the style of the wealthy, and the tradition has remained to this day. 3. How many species live in or on the human body? There are about 200 species, including 80 in the mouth alone, that inhabit the human body. Alongside these, our bodies are also host to a mind-boggling number of bacteria. The total excreted by the body every day ranges from 100 billion to 100 trillion. Some 10 million occupy every square centimeter of our flesh. The most densely populated areas of the human body are the teeth, throat, and digestive tract, which overflows with friendly bacteria that are essential to our health. Their numbers may be vast, but their scale is microscopic. If you put the billions of bacteria on your skin together, it would only be the size of a pea. Another life form that keeps us company is the common parasite, for example, the follicle mite. It's found on every individual in huge numbers, and it's a good thing, too, as they spend their days harmlessly munching dead skin cells, acting as invisible refuse recyclers. A less welcome guest is the human itch mite, which lays its eggs on or under our skin, causing the intensely itchy condition known as scabies. 4. Why do we dream? Some scientists think dreaming is just a random byproduct of the fact that the brain can't switch off completely during sleep. Others think it may be the brain tidying up its filing system during the night, processing memories and their associations. Psychologists see more meaning in our dreams. They note that they often focus on our everyday anxieties and think we are practicing facing them again in different situations. A need to rehearse the most extreme worst-case scenarios would explain recurring nightmares. Suppose you really did absolutely no revision for that exam? What if you got to work or college and had forgotten to put your trousers on? But our dreams can also show us important truths, and they sometimes seem to decide it's time we practiced having the experiences we wish for, so you can even fly. But is there any danger we'll get out of bed and jump out of the window? Well, in 1951, physiologist Eugene Aserinsky connected his 8-year-old son to an early brainwave machine and watched the results through the night. They showed that every 90 minutes we enter a different state in order to dream, called REM, because we display rapid eye movement. However, most of our muscles switch off during this period, meaning that the flying and running away from monsters only happens in our heads. 5. What is the origin of the @ symbol? History suggests that the @ in email addresses, commonly referred to as the @ sign, stemmed from the tired hands of medieval monks. During the Middle Ages, before the invention of the printing press, every letter of a word had to be painstakingly transcribed by hand for each copy of a book. The monks who performed these tedious copying duties, usually in Latin, looked for ways to reduce the number of individual strokes for common words. Although the word for @ in Latin, ad, is also short, it was so common that the monks wished it were even shorter. So they began to loop the d around the, making it much quicker to write. The @ symbol would have been largely forgotten in modern times if it hadn't been for a computer scientist called Ray Tomlinson. In 1971, he wanted a symbol to separate a person's name from that of their computer, and now all email addresses follow the format joe@myserveraddress.com. The symbol has different and often charming names in different languages, many of which see the shape as a kind of animal. These include, Klammeraf is German for a hanging monkey, Appenstartje is Dutch for the monkey's tail, Kissenhanta is Finnish for a cat's tail, Dalfienjai is Korean for snail, Papaki is Greek for little duck, Kukak is Hungarian for a worm, Grisel is Norwegian for pig's tail, Snabel is Danish for elephant's trunk, Sabachka is Russian for little dog.